November 1964, Nashville, Tennessee. The corner of Broadway and Fifth Avenue, just outside Linebaugh's Diner. A man named Roy Hurst stands on the sidewalk in the cold and counts coins in his palm. He is 61 years old. He came home from the Pacific in 1945 with a Purple Heart, a compression fracture in his lower spine from a mortar blast on Peleliu, and a handshake from a Navy officer who told him the country was grateful. The country's gratitude, as best Roy could calculate it 19 years later, amounted to a disability check that covered the rent on his room at the Clarkston boarding house on 8th Avenue and left approximately $4.30 per day for everything else. Food, bus fare, the aspirin he took every morning for the back that never stopped hurting. He had been a machinist before the war. After the war, the back would not let him stand at a lathe for more than 20 minutes without the pain becoming something he could not work through. He tried. He tried for 3 years. Then he stopped trying and started managing. Roy Hurst was good at managing. He had learned it in the cotton fields of western Tennessee as a boy, learned it on the troop transports crossing the Pacific, learned it in the years after coming home when managing was the only option available. He ate once a day usually. He kept his room clean. He washed his one good shirt every Sunday and hung it to dry over the radiator. He was not a man who complained. He was not a man who asked for things. He walked 2 miles to Linebaugh's on the first Tuesday of every month because Linebaugh's had a blue plate special for 65 cents, and the first Tuesday of the month was the day his check cleared, and 65 cents was something he could do. He is standing on the sidewalk outside Linebaugh's now, counting what he has. Quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, laid out carefully across his palm in the November cold. His hands are the hands of a man who spent 30 years working with them, thick across the knuckles, a scar running the length of the left index finger from a lathe accident in 1939. He counts once. He counts again. 58 cents. The blue plate is 65. He is 7 cents short. He stands there a moment longer than necessary, looking at the coins. Not because he does not understand the arithmetic, because he is a 61-year-old man with a bad back and a Purple Heart and 58 cents, and he is standing outside a diner in Nashville, and he needs 7 more cents, and he does not know how to ask for them. What happens next, Roy Hurst would tell his nephew years later, was the last thing he expected on a Tuesday morning in November. Here is the story. John R. Cash was 32 years old in November 1964, and he was famous in the way that cost you things you did not know you were paying. The records were selling. The tours were relentless. He had been on the road for the better part of a decade, playing shows in places that blurred together after enough miles, sleeping in buses, in hotel rooms, in the occasional backseat of a car when the schedule demanded it. He had a face that people recognized on the street in Nashville, and a voice that came out of radios in diners and truck stops and prison common rooms from one end of the country to the other. He also had a darkness running alongside all of it that he was not yet winning against. The pills had been part of his life since the late 1950s. Amphetamines at first for the road, then other things for other reasons. And by 1964, they were not a part of his life anymore, so much as he was a part of theirs. He knew it. June Carter knew it. Most of the people close to him knew it, and were watching with the particular helplessness of people who can see clearly what is happening and cannot stop it from the outside. But here is what was also true about Johnny Cash in November 1964, running right alongside everything else and just as real. He had grown up in Dyess Colony, Arkansas, the son of a sharecropper, in a house on Road 3 with cotton rows up to the back step and a wood stove and not enough of most things. He knew what it looked like when a man was trying to make numbers work that would not work. He had seen his father do it at the kitchen table with a pencil and a pad and an expression that did not change because changing it would not help the numbers. He had done it himself in the years before the music paid. He had stood in rooms and counted what he had and understood with his whole body, not just his mind, the specific weight of coming up short. That knowledge did not leave him when the money came. It settled somewhere in him and stayed. He was walking down Broadway that Tuesday morning, not for any particular reason. He walked when he was in Nashville and not on the road. Walked the way men walk when they need to think without sitting still. He had come from a meeting at Columbia Records that had gone the way meetings at Columbia Records went in 1964, which was to say it had been about the business of his music in a way that felt entirely disconnected from the music itself. He was wearing dark clothes, which he always wore, a coat against the November cold. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was not paying attention to much. He was passing Linebaugh when he saw Roy Hurst on the sidewalk. He did not know his name yet. He knew the posture, the specific angle of a man's shoulders when he is standing still on a public sidewalk and doing something private, something he would rather not be seen doing. The way the hands were held, the way the eyes were down. Cash had seen that posture before. He had worn it himself. He slowed without deciding to slow. Roy was still counting, still 58 cents, still 7 short. Cash stopped. He stood there a moment on the sidewalk without saying anything, watching a man he had never met try to solve a problem in his palm. Roy looked up. He saw a tall man in dark clothes looking at him with an expression that was not pity and was not curiosity exactly, but was something more direct than either. Roy closed his hand around the coins. Cash said, "You all right?" Roy said, "Fine, just fine." Cash looked at the closed hand. He looked at the door of Linebaugh's. He looked back at Roy. He said, "What's the special today?" Roy said, "Blue plate, 65 cents. Cash reached into his coat pocket. He did not make a production of it. He was not a man who made productions of things. He pulled out what he had in his pocket, which was a folded bill and some change, and he set 65 cents on Roy's closed fist, 1 coin at a time, without asking permission. Roy opened his mouth. Cash said, "I know you don't need it." That was all he said. Not, "I want to help." Not, "Let me get that for you." Not the words of a man performing generosity for an audience. He said the one thing that made it not charity. He acknowledged out loud that the man in front of him was not helpless, that this was arithmetic, not character, that the gap between 58 cents and 65 cents was not a measure of Roy Hurst's worth as a human being, but simply a number that needed to be closed so a man could eat his dinner. Roy stood there with the coins in his hand. He said, "I'm going to pay you back." Cash said, "I know you will." He said it the way you say something when you mean it, and also when you understand that the paying back is not really the point. The point was standing on a Nashville sidewalk in November and treating a stranger with the same matter-of-fact dignity you would want someone to treat you with if the numbers didn't work out one Tuesday morning. Roy went inside and ordered the blue plate. Cash kept walking. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches. Roy Hurst ate his dinner. He did not know the name of the man who had put the coins on his fist. He had seen the face somewhere, on a record sleeve or a poster, something, but the name would not come, and he did not go after it. He finished the blue plate and drank his coffee, and walked back to the boarding house on 8th Avenue and sat in his room and thought about it for a while. He was not a sentimental man. He did not tell the story for years. When he did tell it, finally, to his nephew Harold in the early 1970s, over a kitchen table in Memphis, he did not tell it as a story about being helped. He told it as a story about being seen. "There is a difference," Roy said. "There are people who help you and make sure you know they are helping you. And then there are people who just fix the number and keep walking." That man just fixed the number and kept walking. Harold asked him who it was. Roy said he had figured it out eventually. A few months after the diner, he had seen a photograph in a newspaper, a tour announcement, and he had recognized the coat and the posture and the specific way the man had stood on the sidewalk without performing standing. It was Johnny Cash. Harold asked if Roy had ever contacted him, Ever written a letter or tried to find him? Roy thought about it for a moment. Then he said no. He said he hadn't because the man had not done it for a letter. He had done it because it was 7 cents, and a man was standing outside in the cold, and it needed doing. Sending a letter would have made it into something bigger than it was meant to be. It was meant to be a small thing done quietly. Roy said he thought the best way to honor a small thing done quietly was to leave it small and quiet. Roy Hurst died in 1978. He was 74 years old. He had lived in Nashville for most of his adult life, and he had seen it change from a small southern city to a place where the music business was an industry, and the streets he had walked for decades were filling with people who had come from everywhere else. He kept his room clean until the end. He kept washing his shirt on Sundays. He never forgot the coins. Now, June Carter Cash. She was not on Broadway that November morning. She and Cash were not yet married, would not be until 1968, and in November 1964 they were in that particular country between friendship and something more. A country June navigated with the clear-eyed practicality of a woman who had been through enough to know the difference between a man worth waiting for and a man who looked like one. She was waiting. She had made the decision to wait, and she held to it the way she held to everything, completely, without apology. But she knew, even then, the thing that the story on that sidewalk illustrates. She knew it because she had watched him closely enough to see past the famous voice and the dark clothes and the chaos of those years to the specific quality underneath all of it. He was a man who noticed. Not in the distracted way of people who are performing attention, in the way of someone for whom other people's difficulty registers as a physical fact, like cold air or the smell of rain, something the body responds to before the mind has finished deciding what to do. She said once, years later, that what she loved most about him was not the voice, though the voice was extraordinary. It was that he never walked past a person in trouble without at least stopping to look. The voice could fill an arena. The stopping was what made him who he was. That stopping. That moment on Broadway in November 1964, when a man in dark clothes slowed down because he recognized a posture he had worn himself. It was not a grand gesture. It was not the kind of thing that gets written up in newspapers or remembered in official histories of the man in black. It was 7 cents in 62 words and a decision made in about 4 seconds on a sidewalk in the cold. But Roy Hurst ate his dinner that day, and for the rest of his life, whenever he counted coins, he counted them a little differently, with the knowledge that someone had once looked at him doing it and had not looked away. Johnny Cash spent his career doing that, not just on Broadway in November 1964, but in prisons and hospitals and backstage corridors and bus stations and every other place where people were trying to make numbers work that would not work. He wore black because he said he would wear it until things got better for the people who had nothing. Things did not get better fast enough for him to stop wearing it. He wore it until the day he died. There is something in that worth holding on to. Not the celebrity version of it, not the legend of the man in black as a brand or a costume or a myth. The actual version. A boy from Dyess, Arkansas, who grew up understanding hunger and invisibility and the specific arithmetic of not enough, who got famous and stayed famous for 40 years and never once forgot what the numbers looked like when they didn't add up, who stopped on sidewalks, who walked into prisons, who sat in hotel rooms until midnight learning a stranger's song, who noticed. That is the whole of it, not complicated, not dramatic. A man who came from nothing and remembered what nothing felt like and used every bit of what he became to make sure the people still living in it knew that someone saw them. 7 cents on a fist in November. Everything else grew out of the same ground. If this story reached you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if there is someone in your life who just fixed the number and kept walking the way Johnny did. Those are the people worth talking about. Hit the like button if this is the kind of story you want more of, and subscribe so you are here for what comes next. There are more of these. People who chose, quietly, when they did not have to. We are not done yet. There is a detail worth adding here because it belongs to the story even if it did not happen on that sidewalk. Cash played his first prison concert not at Folsom, but at Huntsville, Texas, in 1957. He was 25 years old and had been famous for approximately 2 years. His management thought it was an unusual request. Cash did not think it was unusual at all. He thought it was the most natural thing he had ever been asked to do. He stood in front of those men and played, and when it was over, he understood something that would take him years to fully articulate. He understood that the voice his mother had given him in the cotton field, the voice that turned hard hours into something you could carry, worked best in the rooms where the hours were hardest. Not arenas, not television studios, rooms where people had nothing else, where the music was not entertainment, but something closer to oxygen. He kept going back. Huntsville again. Cummins Prison Farm in Arkansas, which was 60 miles from where he grew up, and where the conditions were bad enough that he testified about them to the United States Senate. He went to San Quentin. He went to places that did not have names that meant anything to anyone outside their county lines. He went because he believed, with the stubborn, specific faith of a man who has personal knowledge of what it means to be on the wrong side of every line, that these men deserved to hear someone who understood. The music was the same music he played everywhere. The voice was the same voice. What was different was the room. And what was different about the room was that in those rooms, the people listening were not there by choice, had not bought tickets, had not dressed up for a night out. They were there because they lived there. And when you play for people who live somewhere, instead of people who are visiting, something changes in the music. It gets more honest. It has nowhere to hide. Cash understood this. He talked about it in interviews over the years, not in the language of performance theory, but in the plain language of a man stating a thing he knows to be true. He said the prisoners never lied to him. They either responded or they didn't. They could not be polite about it. They had nothing to be polite about. And that truth, that complete absence of performance on their side, brought out something in him that the polite audiences never quite reached. He needed them as much as they needed him. That is the part the legend sometimes misses. The man in black walking into Folsom or Huntsville or the street corner outside Linebaugh's Diner is often told as a story about a famous man descending to help the less fortunate. That is not what it was. It was a man from the cotton rows of Dyess, Arkansas, going back to the rooms that felt like home. Going back to the people who were living in the same arithmetic he had grown up in. Not to save them, to be with them. To say, with his presence and his voice, and sometimes with 7 cents on a closed fist, that he had not forgotten where he came from, and he was not going to pretend he had. The boarding house on 8th Avenue where Roy Hurst lived his last years is gone now. The block was redeveloped sometime in the 1980s, and what stands there now is something else entirely. Nashville changed. The Broadway that Cash walked down in November 1964 is not the Broadway that exists today. Linebaugh's Diner itself closed in 1978, the same year Roy Hurst died, which is not meaningful, but is the kind of coincidence that feels like it ought to be. What does not change is the arithmetic. There are still men counting coins on sidewalks. There are still Purple Hearts and disability checks, and the specific gap between what a man has and what a meal costs. The question is the same question it has always been. Who stops? Who keeps walking? Who looks at a man counting coins in the cold and sees in it something they recognize from their own history? Cash stopped. He stopped in November 1964 outside Linebaugh's, and he stopped every time after that, in every room and on every stage where there were people the world had decided were not worth stopping for. He stopped because he was from Dyess, and Dyess never left him. And the people who are from places like Dyess do not forget what it costs to be invisible. The coins on Roy's fist, The song learned in a hotel room at midnight. The black clothes worn every day for 40 years. They are all the same gesture. They all say the same thing. I see you. I have not forgotten. I am not walking past.